Hello my lovelies. Today Corey aka the Tolkien Professor and I are covering the topic of the unfit to rule queens of Númenor. This is a part of a longer discussion with Corey about various Middle-earth topics. Check out our Hobbits and the Second Age video if you're interested. All of Corey's and Signum University's links in the description of this video. And one last thing before we start talking evil queens. Don't forget to like and comment on this video and consider subscribing to my channel. I cover mostly First and Second Age of Middle-earth topics and I put in a lot of effort and time, but it is hard as a smaller channel on YouTube, so any interaction would help and be much appreciated as I want to continue bringing free Middle-earth content to you. Enjoy.
Númenor, no. No, so let's maybe summarize a teeny tiny bit before we get into the topic. So what is the case here? So we have a lot of 36, I think, rulers of Númenor. You know, it's basically the island was given to the Númenorians in the beginning of the Second Age. 6 or 9, I always confuse that. Ships went, but over the course of 50 years, more and more people settled and came. It was a blessed island, the most western part, you know, close to the Undying Lands, closest to the Undying Lands, yada, yada, yada. Everybody was blessed, or people were blessed, especially the line of Elros Tar-Míriel, the first king, Elrond's twin brother. And they got to that island. He founded this kingship of Númenorians. And the first ones were just male heirs, so there was no problem. But in those 36 kings, you know, we have a few ruling queens. And the first... she didn't rule, sadly, and I think this is where where a lot of the problems stem from. Maybe Tolkien wants to tell us this, is Silmarien. So she was the eldest daughter of Tar-Elendil, who was, I think, the fourth king. This was still in the beginning days. She was the first child, but she had a younger brother. So she was passed over because there was no law during that time, you know, that said the eldest or just the son. Very often, this is very interesting how Tolkien describes this, and kingship is very important for him, and inheritance and all. This is an important topic. You know, he's British, right? He can't help himself.
He can't help himself.
I'm German, British, so we also know that.
Right.
But so she should have been, and I think Tolkien tells us that, because from then on things get worse and worse and worse, and her line later becomes the line of the faithful. This is literally the name, and this is the line where Aragorn even stems from. Elendil, all these good guys stem from her line. That is definitely, that is of some importance, right? You would, yeah.
Oh, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, it's definitely of importance. And it is a really interesting thing. So on the one hand, it's very sort of natural that the Númenorians, especially at the beginning, would have been this kind of very traditional, old school, patrilinear, you know, kingship thing. Even though they're not in anything like that. I mean, in Númenor, right? The kind of cultural and political circumstances are nothing like they were back in Beleriand, for instance, right? You know, where you've got warrior kings who have to be on the front lines in the War of Morgoth, and that's usually it's in that kind of environment, right? That kind of very military, very
you fought for your right to rule.
You fight for exactly. And you still get the occasional Haleth, right, who is able to make things happen, right? But in general, in that kind of thing, you know, you tend to have like, well, we need to have, you know, a strong man, you know, male warrior king, you know, to lead the people into the battle, or else we're going to have trouble, right? So that's where they came from, right? That's the culture that they came from. So it's not surprising that in those first generations, they still are kind of like by default in that way. Like, well, obviously, you know, the king has to be a dude. Even though, as I said, there's no longer any reason. Like Silmarien could totally, like, who says no? Like, what kind of cultural pressures existed to prevent that? But they didn't even seem to have like thought of it exactly. No. And here's the other.
But don't you think just one thing? Don't you think it's strange because we know they just had 1 or 2 children? Númenóreans had very few, and it's very important for him to tell us that they had a few children. So why wouldn't you make up, if you're Elros, right? Why wouldn't you make up a rule so you know your succession, so that there are no? Look at Charlemagne and all these people. What happened? They split up their kingdoms, you know. And we know this is always bad. This is what they did in Arnor, right? Splitting up Gondor and Arnor, and then even splitting up Arnor in 3 kingdoms, you know? That was a mistake. That weakens you.
Right,
so,
right. And so, I mean, and they avoided that, right? I mean, Silmarien and her line they don't split off and become a separate kingdom or something like that. So they do manage to avoid that, but it's more like, again, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I hate to say, like, it just never seemed to occur to the Númenóreans that girls could be rulers. Like, but it's almost like that. Like they are looking back on their previous traditions, right? And they're following their previous traditions. Yeah. This is the one note that I find most interesting with the Silmarien thing, though, is that one question, of course, that Tolkien had to answer was how exactly does Elendil, and through Elendil Aragorn, end up with the ring, right? With the ring of Bari here. Like that should be, why is that not in the kingly line? Why did that not go down with, with Ar-Pharazôn over there in Valinor at the end? And the answer is Silmarien, right? The answer is that her younger brother, who becomes king, gives her the ring. It gives her the ring and to have for her line. It almost like, I don't know what, guilt, compensation, like recognizing that, like, okay, so I
think it's compensation. Yes. I always thought that.
Some kind of compensation, as if there's an awareness, right? And again, was Tolkien suggesting this exactly, right? But like, some kind of awareness of this really ain't right. This is not how it should go. I'm receiving what should, I, the younger brother, am receiving what should go to you. And so I'm gonna give you this ring in compensation. And again, the very fact that Tolkien settled on that as the mechanism for how the ring gets transmitted, is suggestive. I don't think it's not quite strong enough to say that Tolkien was explicitly criticizing them. Like, he doesn't explicitly say this was wrong. This was wrong. Like, they shouldn't have done that, right? But it's one thing that you can build on to say, you know what, actually, it was, like, certainly in retrospect, it was wrong. And as you say, the ultimate destiny, I mean, look, the line of the faithful, right, and all the way down to Amandil and Elendil, like, these were the good guys all the way through. I mean, if there is that, I mean, you mentioned like the blessing of Númenor, right? If there is a blessing upon not only the Númenóreans, but a special blessing, which there plainly was, even just given by the length of their lives and stuff, a special blessing on the House of Elros, that blessing continued in a special way with the line of Silmarien, which was no longer the rulers anymore. So it is fascinating that Tolkien kind of has it both ways here, right? On the one hand, traditional patrilinear, the boy inherits and becomes king kind of deal. But at the same time, he's created this situation where it is very open to question. It does seem like, and this is the very first point at which the line of Elros begins to kind of make mistakes. And so it's interesting. I mean, it's a very gentle kind of implied criticism
Yes.
by Tolkien. You know, you can't turn it into a strong argument that women should have been ruling from the beginning, but it's there.
Yeah, but this contradicts for me always. So he says, in a way, this is how I understand it. Again, this is not what Tolkien says in any words by himself, or not even his son. But this is what you can read into it, and I think most people will who read passages from that time. So Silmarien, yeah, she should have been the queen, you know, from her line, then stem the faithful. Okay, but what goes wrong then with the reigning queens after? Because what he tells us there is, they are unfit to rule. They are unwilling to rule. We know more about the time to who is it? Tar-Míriel, right? She was the second ruling queen and the 11th ruler. And during her time, the bloody rings were forged. The war with Sauron, a lot of things, and then also her ancestor Tal-Aldarion, who was basically the nephew of this Silmarien. He becomes king. During his reign, they start, or even his father's, but they really start colonizing Middle-earth. They go back to Middle-earth. Right? He becomes the mariner. This is a very interesting story. Again, we learn so much about her and her father during the Mariner's Wife. This is one of the best tales, by the way. I have a longer stream with a fellow Tolkien scholar about the Mariner's Wife. This is one of my favorite parts of the Legendarium. It is so telling, and it's really interesting about the Mariners Guild and how he set it up. And this is a lot about, you know, tells you a lot about Númenor and the starting problems in Númenor, you know, like the bad things of colonization, when things go wrong, when you go to lands and take all the woods there because your father forbids you to, you know, to chop down the woods in Númenor, and all these things. So for the first time during these queens' rule, you hear of problems with fathers and sons. They, you know, they don't even speak anymore with each other. Women who refuse, queen who refuse to marry, queen who start resenting men, hating men. Like, this is their husbands. This is really bad. This is not what you imagine Elrond's twin brother's line to be like in a, you know, like what is happening there. And this is always, these stories mainly happen during the reign of the three ruling queens. This is insane.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's so
doesn't he, so that was my main question. I came up with this topic. Does Tolkien tells us women shouldn't rule? Because he said something very interesting in the beginning. Rulers in the beginning days, in, you know, in lands in Europe during the medieval times, you had to fight, right? This is how William the Conqueror got his throne, right? He got it by fight. This is how many British and German and whatnot French rulers got to the throne, not by inheritance, by fighting for it, right? Women, they had to, you know, like, you know, get bored children, like 8, 9, 10, 11 children. Well, try to fight during being pregnant most of your life. Good luck. You know, like, this is not, this is, so this, I understand why there are hesitations. There were hesitations about, you know, like Queen Matilda, about all these called she-wolves, Isabella of France, like Margaret of Anjou, all these rulers, and you know, like, no, they were not fit to fight, right? So this is another topic. But Númenor was peaceful during that time. So what happened?
Yeah. So. Okay, here's one of the things that I primarily think about this era. And we got the two ruling queens come pretty soon after the one who doesn't rule, right?
Yes.
Which, first of all, by itself seems to me a really interesting point, right?
Yeah.
So there's Tar-Míriel, who is the first ruling queen.
Yes.
And she's the daughter of
Aldarion.
Of Aldarion, yeah, exactly, that you were mentioning. And then there's Tar-Míriel that you mentioned before, and she's, I forget the exact, she's a couple generations later after Ancalame.
11th ruler, yeah.
Yeah. So they are. So the first thing we have to keep in mind is that they are in that line that like if Silmarien should have ruled or had ruled, they would never have ruled, right? They're already examples,
Painted.
yeah, of like the first, you know, they're within the first few generations of that second line ruling. And again, if we're right in sort of, I don't want to. It sounds too extreme to say something like, and the blessing has passed from the royal house of the Númenorians. But if it's kind of like that, right? If that blessing is following Silmarien's line more than it is following you know, now the ruling lines of the kings and queens, then these other queens, this is Tolkien just being sort of fair, right? And saying that, like, yes, the women weren't much better than the men as far as this is concerned. I mean, Tar-Aldarion is a really interesting figure, but he is dysfunctional in several. I mean, he's not a horrible guy, and he, you know, he does some really good things, but his enormously dysfunctional marital life leads to the totally messed up childhood of Ancalame, who becomes queen and becomes apparently a very unpleasant person. And what do we see? Like, what do we see in her and in Telperion as well? Telperion is the one. So Telperion refuses to marry at all. Right. Yeah. She's the one who refuses to get married.
She has no offspring.
But she clings to power. She refuses to give up the scepter either. She rules for ages, like 400 years. So she's like Queen Victoria, except without children, right? Or without being
and without an Albert. So you know,
exactly. She
no
has
royal
no Albert.
Hall.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, yeah. So she refuses to get, and those are both of those things. Like, that's a bad profile. That's a really bad profile for a ruler, especially for a Númenorian ruler. I mean, it's kind of a low-key claim to fame, actually, that like she's the first one who doesn't give up the scepter. Like, she doesn't give up the scepter until, you know, in the Silmarillion, it mentions, oh, and I'm blanking out on the name of the dude who was like the first one to basically die as king. He's the one, and it's after
I think it's Tar-Míriel.
Tar-Míriel, yeah, that's it. That's it, yeah. Tar-Míriel is the one who gets credit in the Akallabeth for being the first one not to like yield the scepter. But Telperion, like, she didn't yield the scepter until like the very last minute. I mean, it was pretty close already. So we can see them already heading in that direction, you know. Morally, there's a serious moral decline going on. And Ancalame, not much different, right? She does get married in the end, like out of spite, you know, in order to like manipulate and wound her husband. I mean, it's an unpleasant, we don't get it. He didn't tell the whole story. What we have is Christopher.
I think Halakha was also a weird dude. Like, her husband, you know, kind of shady.
He was trying to get power for himself in large part. You know, he like disguised himself and tricked her, and then she was resentful, and it was, I mean, it's a weird story with nobody looks great in that story either direction, really, but yes, Tolkien just gave this in like notes, right? I mean, we have his notes on what was gonna happen with Ancalame, that Christopher gives us in Unfinished Tales, kind of appended to the story of Aldarion and Arendis as it exists, which is unfinished, of course. Anyway, so it's they are these first two ruling queens. Are part of the decline. Now, I certainly don't see any reason to think that he is suggesting that they were part of the decline because they were female, right? Like, oh, you know, once Númenor like started having ruling queens, it went straight downhill, right? Like,
you don't think so?
I don't think so. I don't think so. And here's why I don't think. I mean, Silmarien is the reason I don't think that, right? Because the whole logic of that entire thing suggests not that you know, girls in power is the problem. It was that the wrong, you know, woman was in power. Like the wrong queen was, like, if Silmarien had been queen, then none of them would have been queen. And again, it seems to me to be pointing towards you know, there are a couple like decision points, right? Like critical moments in the history of Númenor when they choose poorly, right? And Tar-Míriel is, of course, a very famous one, right? With the that debate that we get in the Akalabaith between, you know, the elves who come over and Tar-Míriel and the Númenorians there, and when they you know, when they basically kind of part ways with the with the you know, the rationale of Valinor and start becoming more not yet like militarily, of course, but kind of mentally, right, and intellectually in rebellion against the Valar and against the elves.
They start to question the gift of men, and they, you know, the shadow fell on. I think that was his predecessor, Kiryatan. Then the shadow, the shadow fell on Númenor. Tolkien says that.
Yes, exactly. And what are we seeing here? Like with Telperion and Ancalame, like a shadow is already falling, and it's not a different shadow; it's the same shadow, right? Telperion is. You think about the dysfunctional story of Ancalame, and you think about the dysfunctional story of Telperion, and the way in which they're dysfunctional is in this. You know, that this Telperion shows the same kind of like turning inward and clinging to life, right? That we're going to get in more extreme ways later on, right? Ancalame is you know, sort of arbitrary and willful and self-indulgent in ways that again, we will see more of later on. They're I was going to say foretastes, but they're not even foretastes. They're the beginning of that slide. And it's not just them. Like it's not like there were these two like bad women amongst no, like they're all. He's showing that
it's going down.
Yes,
it's a process. It's just interesting that because from some other queens, take, I don't know, somebody's 16th king or whatever. You know, he has love of mithril or whatever. He loves silver or what. There's literally everything Tolkien gives us about them. But about the queens, you know a lot during the time of the queen. So I think this is also due to they needed. You can't just say they ruled, and you know you need, because he needs to explain. Okay. There was strife, because if it's just a man, you know, he marries, they always marry somebody from the line of the faithful. This is also interesting. They very often marry kind of close relatives, not on the X factor, but still close relatives. So all the kings, a lot of the kings married wives from the line of the faithful. That later on even comes into play with, I think, Gimilzar or whoever, whose mother was a faithful, and you know they went back to the good graces for like one king ruling, and then you know it went downhill again. But I think this aspect of them being women, and it is always, you need somebody to fight. You need to explain these things. You need somebody to go to Middle Earth, because you're not going yourself. You're still in Númenor, but you need your cousin or your uncle, like Isilmo, her brother, you know, Tar-Parion's brother. Isilmo went to Númenor and fought her wars. Then her nephew, his son, Tar-Minastir, went to Númenor, met Sauron, you know, and all these things. So you need to explain more when a woman is ruling. It's true.
Yes. Yeah. And that was another thing that was especially apparent with Ancalame, right? That sense of neglect. Like, I'm just going to be here in Númenor, you know, kind of like amusing myself. And then with like, sheep. Oh, yeah. Yeah, with sheep. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to hang out with sheep. While meanwhile, you know, everything's going to hell in Middle Earth, right? Which, you know, abandoning even the policies of her own father, Aldarion, who cared so much about that stuff that he neglected his family and caused the whole problem. No,
it was a mother's fault. Stop it, Corey. It was, seriously, one of the characters, I hope one day we'll get her. I dislike Erendis so much, and I say that as a woman myself. I dislike. how he portrays her in the Aldarian and the Arendis story is horrible.
Yeah, I just did a Reddit AMA this past weekend, and one of the questions I was asked was, am I team Aldarion or team Arendis? And they said I couldn't wimp out. And in the end, I was like, if I have to choose, I am team Aldarion, because I mean, my experience of that story is absolutely, like, at the beginning, I'm totally on her side, like 100% on her side. At the start,
because he didn't want to marry her. He let her,
and when he's going away, like his dad is completely right when he's when he gets engaged to Arendis, and then is like, oh, but I still want to go sailing away, and it's like, dude, okay, like, well, then you shouldn't have gotten engaged, buddy. Like, you can't have it both ways. No. And he's totally right. So I was like, okay, Aldarion, no way. And here's long-suffering Arendis back in Numenor, and like,
and she has a shorter lifespan and all that. You understood,
sure. But by the end, like, oh, no way, like, no way, like I am a total, like, my sympathy for her is really high at the beginning, and then it just gets lower and lower and lower over the course of the book. Yeah, no question.
And you know that Tolkien agrees with us when the birds leave, because birds leaving people is always a sign.
That's not good.
It's not good. When the eagles left Numenor, when, like, seriously, this is a total hint, because he tells you she got gifted birds from the elves, I think, right?
Yes,
from the elves,
yeah,
and
on
those
their marriage,
yeah, and those two birds, then she lets them fly, and they're gone. And
yeah, no, and she, like, destroys the trees. I mean, it's bad.
She
like,
does.
It's not good. It is not a good look. I as I say, I'm sympathetic with her at the start, but not at the end, and it just becomes this, like, really complicated, unsatisfying, tragic story by the end. Unsatisfying in the sense that, like, I mean, there are no heroes, right? Everyone's problematic, in that story.
It's tragic.
It is tragic.
Family,
It is tragic. But again, go back to An-Kalame, right? Then she's just kind of, she leaves it, right? She just kind of leaves it, being Middle Earth, right? She just kind of leaves it. And so again, we see another one of those, the threads of Numenor's decline, right?
Yeah.
How when the house of Elros is no longer leading the people in like kind of like doing what's right, when An-Kalame is out there playing with sheep and manipulating people, she's she's not, what she's doing is not, she's being she's a very bad leader. She's a bad queen. She's just a bad queen. And it and again, like, dysfunctional childhood, sure, but anyway, but the particular badness of those first two ruling queens is very symptomatic of the downslide of Numenor. And I agree with you. It is interesting that he chose to attach that to the queens, right? He could have just passed them up. We could have just learned nothing about them except they like silver, and instead, have these things be told of one of the kings, and we don't get that. And so that it is interesting that he kind of makes them the focal point. But to me, what's interesting about it is that they seem to me to be primarily sort of foils to Silmarien, right? It's like here's what happens when you've got, so you had the one who should have been queen. And now we know very little about Silmarien personally. What kind of person was she? Would she have been an awesome queen? I can't help but think that maybe she would have, but it just, like, the genealogy implies that she probably would have been a better queen. But anyway, so if we're safe to assume that that she would have been a better queen, then what we're getting in the other two ruling queens is not just it's not a, like, see, here's what happens when you put women in charge kind of situation. It's here's what happens when you take the wrong turning, you know, when you come to that fork in the road and you take the wrong turning, and that he chooses ruling queens to contrast with the implied, like what might have been, right? In order to make that connection to Silmarien and her line, I think, a little clearer.
Yeah. No, okay, this is interesting because I always saw it as a complete contrast, and I did never really understand, but why does he then portray these queens completely different if he tells me right from the get-go in the beginning with a fourth or fifth ruler who should have been her, you know, this should have been the rightful ruler, but it wasn't. It was passed on as so many, you know. So that was what I always wondered. And then what happened to the other three? Because you even have with Tar-Míriel later on, there's even with her husband, this is a really difficult word in English, usurpator, which would be the German, I probably mispronounce it. He becomes Tar-Andukal, but he was not the real rightful ruler. She was down the line, right? Tar-Míriel, but he usurpated. Sorry, in German it's usurpator, which comes from Latin. So I don't, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yes. Usurped is how we would say it in English.
Usurped. Sorry.
Yes. It is an awkward word. Yes.
It's an awkward word. Yeah. So he usurped the throne. This is for the first time. You hear that later in Gondor, and this is also a bad time for Gondor, right? When that happens. So this is also interesting. So all the bad things that happened, somebody usurping the throne, also happens during the reign of a queen. This is not good.
Yeah. And that's the thing that's kind of interesting about her, right? Is that she is, so on the one hand, she's almost like Silmarien again, right? She's the woman who should have been queen, right? But now instead of like a peaceful choice to say, oh no, we're going to make the guy king instead of her, like with Silmarien, now we have the forceful usurpation by the obviously bad guy, right? I mean, like the Gimilchor is very bad. Okay, so and he's like, you know, forcibly marrying his first cousin and everything in order to solidify his own power. It's a bad look all around, a bad look. So again, on the one hand, from like objectively speaking, right? Like that is, if you just look at the genealogy, essentially, she is like a repetition almost of the Silmarien situation, right? But then she's okay. No, I said
Andukal is her husband.
Yeah,
it's later.
Andukal.
That's later. I don't know his real name. He becomes Andukal. So anyway, it's I find the words fascinating because you said, you know, king and queen, and let's go back to the meaning of words. But you know, this is like I love this stuff because queen actually doesn't mean you're a ruler. Queen always meant, queen is not the female form of king, for anybody who didn't know. It's not. And so that actually always meant she's kind of a consort. A queen is a consort. It's not somebody who rules. It's not, it later became that. But the word alone, and this is interesting when you think about, you know, these people like Queen Matilda and Eleanor of Aquitaine and all these who ruled actually in their own rights. Henry the First was literally Matilda's father. He didn't have, you know, her brother died in being drunk on a ship in France. So he wasn't a good mariner. Right. But these are the things, you know, that literally meant the word alone doesn't actually means you're not fit to rule because you're not. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is. So Vanamelde is interesting. I was leaping ahead to Tar-Míriel there, which is she's the one. Yeah, she's the one who is to me the kind of the repetition of the Silmarien.
But for her, I feel sorry. Yeah. I think we'll see her in the show. Apparently, this is confirmed, and I feel sorry for her. She's the first queen I feel sorry for, because this is a really bad thing that happened. Yeah.
Yeah. So she is the one, Vanamelde is the one who is basically, she just basically like defers to her. She's like the complete, like absentee. Like she just like refuses to rule, essentially. Yeah. She's the ruling queen who just doesn't want anything to do with it, right? No. As I recall, that's why I'm remembering so little about her, because she does very little. She does, she does very little. Now, there's not a kind of genealogical consequence to this, right? She just sort of defers to her husband, who becomes king, right?
Instead of the son, which is because he would be the rightful ruler. Yeah. Right, exactly.
So when she gives up the scepter, the husband, who has been basically ruling all along, refuses to give up his own power, because since she refused to rule, right? Okay, yes.
Yeah. This is similar to Isabel of France. This is what happened to her, right? Like she wanted to rule for her son, but then her second husband or lover, I don't really remember, took over, and then England, was in complete chaos. And this is what happened here. They didn't want. He was called an usurpator. Sorry for this bloody word. So the son should rule, not the guy.
Right. Yes, exactly. So I mean, here again, we have a female queen who is being, now, first of all, the one thing to emphasize, we only get anything of her story in Unfinished Tales, right? It's only in the description of the line of Elros. So she's not, unlike, several of the others are, mentioned in the Akalabeth, right? Yeah. But Vanamelde is only mentioned in the line of Elros description in Unfinished Tales, which is interesting because because it's a later work of Tolkien, right? So we see him. All of this stuff that he's developing. I mean, first of all, I guess we kind of should have said that earlier on, right? That it's interesting that a very big percentage of the ruling queen of Númenor stuff comes in Tolkien's later days after the publication of The Lord of the Rings. Yeah. And an interesting little trend that I would point to here, this correlates with him going back and not only very deliberately, but even very self-consciously adding female characters back into the Silmarillion material at this time as well. Yeah. When I was doing my Mythgard Academy discussion of Morgoth's Ring last year, this is something that I was noticing as we were going through, that I was tentatively suggesting that Tolkien seemed to be going out of his way during that phase of revision to go back and add in like, oh, well, like Fingolfin had daughters too, right? And he had a wife who had a name and stuff. Yeah. All those things that you don't get, like, the things you never see. Now we know we had Arathel, right? But even Arathel's story actually is developed during that time. Yeah. So anyway, Tolkien did seem to have this impulse at that point to like correction, right? The big complaint that everybody makes about like, oh, there are no female characters. Even Tolkien himself seemed to be aware.
But what was that? Was that Priscilla going to him and is like, who can I identify with? What happened?
I wonder. I wonder. I mean, Priscilla was she was his youngest, of course, and she was older by this time. Did that play a part of it? I don't know exactly. my own theory about this actually is that it has more to do with the change of genre of the story. So like when he wrote when he originally writes like you know the of the princes of the Eldalier, right, the genealogy of the Noldor, he's thinking in like these like way above the like historical chronicle terms, right, in which like you're just noting the most, you're not even doing a thorough look at the genealogy. You're not even actually caring about, you're certainly not caring about the family life of these people, right, or their private lives. You're just caring about like who was king and who became king after that person.
Key facts.
And, key facts. And for these, it was the, you know, the patrilineal descent and who becomes king and who's ruling lands and stuff like that. And so he only mentioned the women, and they were not very many, who became important on those levels, right? So that seemed to be kind of the mode that he was in before. After the Lord of the Rings now, he's thinking about the Silmarillion material very differently. And he is beginning to do, for the Silmarillion material, for his legendarium, the same kind of world building that he did in the Lord of the Rings, which he's flat hadn't done before. I mean, he knew, although he'd been writing about elves since he was, you know, 20, basically, he sort of seems to have found, you know, in the late 50s there, that he actually knew much more about hobbits and hobbit society than he knew about elves and elf society, you know, and like, you know, and so that's why you start getting all of this stuff about what is called, you know, the laws and customs among the Eldar that gets published in Morgoth's Ring, like that, you know, when he's really working this out, like, so what were their family lives like, you know, what was it like to like have and raise children among the elves, like how did that all work? These kinds of questions he's beginning to answer, and I think that to me that's what correlates with it, right? When he's starting to think in those terms and he's starting to answer those kinds of questions, well then guess what, the women start appearing, right? Oh, now let's think about the wives and the sisters and all of these other characters whom we didn't care about when we were just doing the genealogy of nations, right? But now we do care about, because he's thinking more in terms of these stories. And it's in this period that we get the ruling queens.
Then you get no, but it's so interesting what you say, because this is spot on, because when you look at something like the children of Húrin, there are females. You learn about Morven. You learn a lot about, you know, the females. But this is a complete different genre. And I never complain, because I know there are lots of people out there that say, you know, where the female characters, like in the Lord of the Rings. Listen, people, this is a story about war, right? There were no women fighting in the war. Yes, we have Haleth, and, you know, you even have Éowyn, giving us Éowyn in that. I think this is what we talked about last time with Dan about, like I said, you know, as a girl, in the beginning, I always thought, you know, Éowyn is so cool. Why does she make this choice in the end? I never understood her choice, being a girl myself. I read The Lord of the Rings, you know, my father introduced me when I was very little, and I never understood Éowyn's choice in the end. Now, you know, I'm grown up. I understand it. I understand her choice. And it's not a bad choice, because, you know, being a feminist is, you know, having your own choice. Do whatever the F you want, you know. And that is a cool thing he gave us. And I never complain about that. But this is a complete, what you say, this is a change of genre. And when you build a whole world, it's not just a story about war. You build a whole world. So you need a whole, you need to explain a bit more. So you need to introduce a mother and a father, not just the father, to, you know, to explain why this child is how it is. Like, why is Fëanor the way he is? Yes, you know, like mom and dad kind of split up and died.
It was messy.
She chose
posthumous
to
divorce.
Die.
I mean, it's ugly. It got ugly, right?
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
then he took on a new wife.
She was dead. I mean, come on, like that's gotta mess with you, right? I mean,
and there's even a law about it now. You know,
like, good grief, so messed up.
Yeah, but you need these things, you know, you need to explain a bit more if you want to create a whole world. But if you just tell a story about war, it's totally fine that there are not 50% of the characters are not female. I'm perfectly fine with that. But
Right.
yeah, you're right with the queens. This is an interesting aspect. And I do think this makes it more real, feel more real. If you just say there were just kings, they were all good, there were 36 kings. No, introduce one or two. There is maybe down the line, maybe Silmarien could have been Queen Elizabeth I. Who knew?
Right.
Who knows, right?
Right.
There's a possibility of that. So this makes it more real, approachable. Maybe this is then the mythology, you know, in a time far, far away.
Exactly. Yeah. No. And Tolkien seems to have been interested in that. I mean, because the ruling queens were listed, right? I mean, from the, you know, I mean, they're there. They're in the Lord of the Rings. They're mentioned in the Akallabeth, but we don't get any details about them. He goes, or not many anyway. He's going back and making up those stories later on, and he does seem to have gone out of his way to tell us something at least about each of the ruling queens. Like we didn't know anything at all about them before, but now we do. And he, I mean, he seems to have been interested in that question. Like what must have, and I think, again, one of the things that I think that we can see is that he does tend to make them sort of signposts, right, of the decline of Numenor. We do see a usurpation happening with Vanamilda, which is an anticipation of the bigger usurpation that's going to be happening later on. Right now, she's not the one who's usurped; it's her son. But again, around her and within her family, a usurpation is happening, foreshadowing the greater usurpation that's going to be happening later on. We have Telperion, as we said, who is clinging to the scepter and focused on her own power, not yet in ways as badly as that's going to be, but again, she's foreshadowing to, so they're like signposts, right? They're signposts pointing to the decline of Numenor, both as it is happening, right? Showing like, and here is the stage to which we have gone, right? You know, this is how bad it has gotten, but also, pointing how bad it's going to be, foreshadowing how much worse it's going to be getting down the road. And to me, I think it's just because there would have been similar signposts if he had, instead of going in and telling us those stories that happened in the families of those, you know, in the lives and families, in the acts and lives and families, I guess I should say, of those three ruling queens. If instead he had told the stories of three random male kings, I think he would have been doing the same thing. He would have been showing signposts of the fall of Numenor. I don't see any reason to believe that those ruling queens were like worse than average, like worse than the kings surrounding them in the genealogy. You know what I mean?
But you don't think there's any element, because I still believe that. You haven't convinced me otherwise, Corey. I still believe it's because of them being the weaker sex. I really do think, because you see that in, going back to Matilda, you know, I just love Queen Matilda, but you know, her nephew Stephen took over the throne because he could. She was in France because she was bloody pregnant and she couldn't go to England, right? So there are factors of being a woman, being the weaker sex, and I really do think he does play with that element a little bit. I think so. Because it was easier to usurp the throne or to force marry your cousin, as Ar-Pharazôn did later on. I don't think a woman would force, you know, if he would be the ruling queen. I think you know what I'm. You know,
I do. I absolutely.
It was easier to make them female and then explain the bad things that happened because they were weaker. Yes.
Well, and and the thing that I would say in agreement with that is that, I've been talking about signposts of the fall of Numenor, right? And kind of them as pointing to these trends in the downfall of Numenor. Well, one of the major trends of the downfall of Numenor is weakness, decadence, idleness, laziness, self-indulgence, right? All of these
seven sins, basically.
I mean, they do. Some of the kings do like active, aggressively bad things, right? But a lot of the decline of Numenor is just that kind of turning inward, being so. It is like weakness, right? Kinds of weakness and self-indulgence, and so he does in this way, I think that he does find those female characters a more convenient sort of vehicle for that, or sort of symbol of those, because again, they're almost being, the way that they're being singled out and these little stories told about them does make them almost, I don't want to push that too far, but almost like symbols of the decline of Númenor, right? Representatives of, but also symbols of the larger downfall of Númenor. And so in that way, did he find the ruling queens a more congenial, you know, sort of ready symbol of the, you know, that like basically like take the image of well, take Van Imelda, right? The queen who didn't care at all about queening and just wanted to like sing and dance and you know, participate in courtly you know, things like decadence, right? I mean, she is like the symbol of the you know, the self-indulgent decadence of Númenor in its decline. And she's fairly advanced in its decline. She's in like what, 24, like the middle of the third millennium of Númenor. So we're pretty
2500 ish.
Right around there. So anyway, so so she becomes this kind of symbol of the decadence of Númenor. And so like, did he find it like readier in a sense to his hand, right, to have that symbol be a woman? He could have said the same thing of a guy, right? We could have had a man who, a male king, who was just focused on you know, music and dancing and didn't care about anything else. But he didn't tell that version of the story, right? Instead, he told that of a woman. So in that sense, I agree. Again, the part that the thing I'm resistant to is I'm resistant to the idea that like that he is suggesting that women are
it's not based on the sex.
No.
That, I get
that he would say, like, you know, like basically I would be very resistant to a reading which says Tolkien's arguing that this is what happens when you put women in charge, right? They they can't handle it and they're terrible leaders, and see, look at this. Because again, at the head of this whole situation, you have Silmarien, right?
I agree.
Which is doing the exact opposite, I think, of showing clearly a woman should not, like, you know, you're going wrong when women are ruling, right? That's not, it's clearly not what he's saying. But yes, the other things that you're saying there seem totally the association with weakness, decadence, self-indulgence that he does seem to be associating with the female queens does seem very conveniently part of the package there for him.
And he didn't make, you know, Silmarien fight for the throne, which she could have, right? So she didn't fight for the throne, nor did her son or anyone down the line. They were always fine, you know, with being then related. And even her line, you know, like Amandil, Elendil, they became advisors to the kings, right? We know of that. They were close friends. They grew up together. This is very interesting how he portrays it. They were advisors. So they never fought for their right. And this, down in our history, this happened so many times, right? Like, that, you know, like so many people claimed, you know, my great grandfather, like the Tudor line, like seriously, their claim to the throne is like non-existent.
So bad. Yeah. So bad. Yeah.
Still,
absolutely.
You know, this is what happened in our real history.
Exactly. But I would say that's actually, see, this is where we have to be careful, though. That is careful about, it comes back to the weakness issue. Right. It might seem like, well, see, look, as you say, there's Silmarien just rolling over and, you know, being shunted aside and being all quiet about it and apparently not making any stink. And so that it's tempting to say, like, well, and see, so there she is being, you know, another weak woman, right? Being weak. But that's not bad. As you say, like, yes, it is very much a theme of Silmarien and her line that they don't insist on their rights, that they don't try to get what they could.
Yeah.
But that's good. That's why we don't have an Arnor situation in Numenor. We would have otherwise, right? We'd have splintered the kingdom in the fourth
Civil
generation
War.
if that had happened. Right? Exactly. So the you know, the peacefulness, the humility, I would say, the humility of Silmarien and her whole line. That Amandil was not, because he could have done, right? Amandil could have been like, all right, look, this is beyond crazy, right? This has gone far enough. You know, the line of Silmarien is rising up and saying, let's just hit the reset button on Númenor. Let's do this whole thing over again. Let's return the throne to the, everybody with me. Let's overthrow the king. I mean, they could have done that, right? But the faithful were never like that. It was always about, and this is one of the things that is so striking about Tolkien's world from beginning to end, right? I don't think that there is any author who has heroized humility like Tolkien has, you know, and that is, it's
pity. Take the aspect of pity. What, you know, what they did with Gollum later on plays into the same,
The greatest heroes are always the ones who don't push themselves forward, who don't insist on their rights, who don't, you know, I mean, that's, you know, those who are willing to accept a smaller role, those who, I mean, humility is the most important virtue in Tolkien's world. And it's amazing. Like, it's tempting to say, like, you can't write epic fantasy like that. Like, humility is
not very
not
warlike.
No, humility is like the least exciting virtue. Like, it's you know, it's like the one virtue nobody usually wants to like jump up and down and be supporting, like, hooray for the most humble. Like, that's just that usually does not make a good story, right? So it's this,
or even reluctant
paradoxical
heroes. Or even having a reluctant hero. You would think, just reading the facts, like, oh, this doesn't make a good story. This sounds really boring. Like, why doesn't he scream, yes, come on, let's ride to death and glory.
Right, exactly. And so we see that, but we see this virtue of humility woven back all the way through it from the beginning. We see it, and as far as the ruling queens are concerned, we see it at the beginning and we see it at the end, right? We see it in Silmarien, and we also see it in Míriel at the end. And it's easy not to like it, right? A lot of people don't like humility. A lot of people get, you know, like, because it's because of the weakness thing, right? But actually, you know, I never really thought about this before we've been having this discussion today, but doesn't it make for a really interesting picture? Because there's weakness and then there's weakness, right? You have the apparent weakness that is the humility of Silmarien and of Míriel at the end. And you have the weakness of the other queens in the middle, right? The self-indulgence of Vanamelda and the selfishness of Telperion, right? All those things. But their weakness is not like the weakness, you know, not like the humility of the, you know,
the word has a complete different meaning, although it implies, it's true.
Exactly. So none of them,
it's like a frame again, Corey. It's a frame. They're framing.
It is like a frame again. Absolutely. And that I think is interesting. I mean, it's like how you do, being weaker, right? How you do it well and how you do it badly. Essentially. But yeah, so it's, we have to be cautious, I guess, in some ways about merely condemning the apparent weakness thing, because again, I would especially say with Silmarien. I mean, Silmarien is one of my favorite figures in the whole line of Elros. I mean, I think she is a fascinating, and of course we know almost nothing about her, so we don't really know her story exactly. But yeah, she is a fascinating figure in this way. Yeah. Well, do you want to talk about Míriel a little bit more?
Yeah, we can. Yeah,
I kind of jumped the gun and started talking about
no,
before,
let's
but
no. We have it.
Yeah.
Corey is a very busy man, and we want to take too much of Corey's time. Yeah, but Míriel, I think it is important, and I do think we're again coming. My channel is not really about the show, but I find it fascinating, and I do think we will see parts. I really, maybe obviously not in season 1. I think that should focus on Forging of the Rings and all that. I really want to see that. I want to see the 9 former good kings and rulers being turned by Sauron. But what I also want to see is this decline. This is why I like my baddies. If you didn't know, Corey. So I really want to see this decline of Númenor, the shadow falling, and literally Sauron being there for how long was he there? 50, not even 50 years. I think 49 years. He became from prisoner to advisor of the bloody king of Ar-Pharazôn, Míriel's forced husband,
to be practically worshipped as a god before the end. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, that's
I want to see debauchery. I want to see Númenor depicted as they had, there was a temple of doom where they worship Melkor. I want to see that. I want to see them burning faithful. This is what they did. They did burn people alive, for anybody who didn't know. And
human sacrifice.
And they had tombs. This is how he described. You don't learn of like cemeteries or anything like that. There's not a lot of this religious. Eru doesn't play a role in that time, of the Menel Tarma where they go and worship, blah blah blah. This is the only religious aspect, but the tomb thing is really interesting, that they were so obsessed with immortality that they built these shrines and tombs, and you can just imagine how it must have looked in Númenor. Basically, the streets were paved with gold, but the people were so deprived. And so, they were at their highest, but they were morally at their lowest. And I want to see that. That is the coolest time.
It is. Yeah. And I mean, just on a sidelight on the show, I have no idea how they're going to pace this, because it's a long time from the Forging of the Rings through till that.
1,500 years or 1,600 years.
I have to assume they're going to compress that to some extent, right? I mean, or else we're going to I mean, the downfall of Númenor is going to happen until like season 7 or something if they don't, right? But assuming that they kind of, I hope not jump too much, but go from the Eldarion and Forging of the Rings era, right? Beginning of the troubles with Sauron, and then kind of jumping forward to Ar-Pharazôn and the capturing of Sauron and the downfall. I don't know how far.
Or that will be a spin, or that will be another spin-off. I strongly believe, dude,
a Númenorian spin-off. Yeah,
I strongly believe he didn't just buy it to have one series. There will be spin-offs. Look what Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones did, right? That was just a setup to introduce you to this world. Maybe this show is still, middle of Númenor, because this is also not the beginning. Forging of the Rings is 1,500, so just around, it drowned in 3,240 or something like that. So 1,500 years later. So as you say, I don't think it makes, like, visually, it's hard to skip 1,000 years and just say, okay, now we're here. Some elves are still alive. Everybody else is dead. Dwarves are dead. Hobbits. Everybody you like and grew to love must be dead, except 2, 3, 4, 5 elves. That's it.
Right. Exactly.
Storytelling wise.
Not to mention the fact, as you say, that the decline of Númenor is the thing that's really interesting, right? So if we just hit fast forward and meanwhile, let's jump back to, and now Númenor has become decadent and horrible. And now, by the way, did we mention they're now sacrificing people? Okay. So that's happening.
So from the blessed island to, debauchery island.
To the Temple of Doom, as you said, I mean, it would be a little jarring, right, to jump too far ahead with that. But I also would have a hard time understanding exactly how they would integrate that into without losing touch with Middle Earth or expanding it to, I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll take them 3 seasons to get to the downfall of Númenor. I don't know. Maybe they will do it more, but
But we will see that this, you know, Tar-Míriel, Ar-Pharazôn, I think Ar-Pharazôn is one of the, we know a lot about him. This is, so he was important for Tolkien, for the whole legendarium. He's such a fascinating character because he started off actually as, again, somebody good. No, he wasn't bad, you know, he was a good fighter, he was a good warrior. This is important in Tolkien's mythology. And then, you know, what happened? Sauron came, this is just like with Fëanor, what Melkor did with Fëanor, you know, he was supposed to be the one who, you know, should be so clever and see through, but he was, you know, he could convince him, oh, your brothers, you know, wanted to. It's interesting that these characters, the promised ones, are the ones who then become the baddies of the story. Same here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the figure that I find really most fascinating in that whole last section is Tar-Palantir.
Yes. He was a faithful poor guy.
And so, but here, what's interesting to me is why didn't he get usurped? Right. So Míriel,
his brother. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So he was the brother that like his dad didn't like, right?
Yeah.
But he was, and again, it's the other female connection there, right? You know,
Insilbeth, his mother, his mother was from the faithful, and it is said she taught the sons. They had two sons, and so Palantir was the good son, Gimilcad was the bad son, the father of Ar-Pharazôn, and so you know, light and darkness.
Exactly. So things get a little bit complicated there, right? Tar-Palantir is he's the elder. He's the one who should rule, even though his father would have rather have the younger son, Gimilcad, to rule. But Tar-Palantir, Tar-Palantir is kind of sandwiched by queens, right?
Yes.
There's Insilbeth, his mom, right, the faithful queen, and then there's Míriel, his daughter, and in the middle there's Tar-Palantir. And Insilbeth and Míriel are both helpless, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can't stop. Insilbeth cannot stop Gimilzor from marrying her, right? Míriel cannot stop Ar-Pharazôn from marrying her, right?
Yeah.
Weaker sex. But there in the middle is Tar-Palantir. But here's the thing. He's not just a guy, right? It's not just that he's a boy that makes him. There's something freaky about Tar-Palantir. Tar-Palantir freaks people out, right?
Really? Why?
I think he freaks people. So that's my reading of it. He was called the Far-Sighted, right?
Yes.
Like there is some kind of like he has foresight. They were afraid of him. Like it seems pretty clear that the King's men were
which he was the king, and the King's men were against the king, which is
right.
insane.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But the rest of them, like they wouldn't do anything against Tar-Palantir. He, you know, turns the people, he tries to turn Númenor back into the right path, you know, and he tries to do all these things, and to some extent briefly succeeds, right? Or at least while he's alive, everybody humors him, right? So I would like, again, if I were
afraid of like a witchy.
Yes, that's exactly kind of the sense that I get, that he has this, he is foresighted. He has this, you know, like we know that the Númenorians are superstitious, right? And that they you know, that they were still holding to the superstitious, but even like with the white tree and everything, right? You know, clinging to these old traditions, and like still writing names in Quenya, you know, in the official books, even though they're not using the Quenya name. So like the way in which they're kind of trying to have it both ways.
Didn't he also say don't burn the trees or the line will fall? You're right.
He's making prophecies. Tar-Palantir he's this prophet figure at the end, and there's this kind of like, they have, the Númenorians still retain this awe of you know, elvish things, you know, the all of the, you know, they still have this superstitious respect for you know, for all of the things about that world that they're theoretically have rejected and turned away from, but yet they haven't completely separated themselves from it. And Tar-Palantir comes along and he's like the embodiment of that tradition, like come to kind of call them to account, right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And that seems to be a real turning point for Númenor, or a potential turning point. They don't turn in the end. Right. But it's like he's like their last chance. You know, Tar-Palantir is like the last chance of Númenor. He's this prophet figure. You know, he's not just standing there saying repent, except he's kind of saying repent to Númenor, right? To give them a chance. And they don't take it, but they don't touch him. Right.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
His mom can't do anything about it. His daughter can't do anything about it, but they don't, you know, as strong as Ar-Pharazôn is, you know, even though he is very strong and has a huge following. But so you'd think from a purely like military standpoint, he could probably usurp the throne now. Right. And take out.
And the people wouldn't even riot, or nothing would happen because the hearts of the people were with Gimmelkart, his father, already. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a bit like the love, you know, they had love for all the elvish things in the beginning. And then it became fear.
Right.
Like you're like you stand and say this is very like very religious, you know, like I always compare this to the Catholic Church, because very many rituals and all these things you don't understand today anymore. But you just stand, like go to the Sixtine Chapel, go to the Vatican. I can only recommend that. You're always like, yeah, religion is no longer important anymore. Just stand there. You feel very humbled. I'm not kidding. And you're like, oh, wow. You no longer understand it, and you understand it very differently, like, you know, like people in the medieval times did. So I think this is very similar to what happened there. So the love of the elves became like, they're still more powerful. We know what happens. They're close to the Valar. This is his undying land over there, but love becomes fear, but they don't dare to touch him, like you say. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's so Míriel, who comes after him, right? She is, whatever he had, which again, I don't think was just a Y chromosome, whatever he had, she doesn't have, right? But she is still in that same position. She is still that link back to the past. And so, and once again, I mean, I should have said that Tar-Palantir, his parenthood shows this clinging to the old thing, like the fact that Gimmelkart had taken Inzelbeth, right, to marry in the first place, or sorry, Gimmelzor took Inzelbeth in the first place to marry, and the fact that Ar-Pharazôn and Amandil grow up, you know, close and everything. Again, shows this tie, right? This kind of draw back towards these other things, you know, towards the faithfulness, towards the elves, towards the Valar, and you know, Míriel sort of represents that.
You're right,
and Ar-Pharazôn, did he need her? You know, no, I don't think he really needed her, you know, but right. But he takes Tar-Míriel as his queen, not just to cement his own usurpation. Again, he had plenty of support to be able to be able to rule. But there's this kind of desire to have it both ways, right? Like we're going to rebel against the Valar, but we're still going to keep the White Tree, right? You know, that the Númenorians are kind of doing it both ways, you know, all the way through this this sort of time. And so Míriel, she becomes this kind of a kind of symbol of that, right? That is what is left after Tar-Palantir. You know, she is his legacy. The legacy of Tar-Palantir is this the fourth ruling queen, who would have been, again, and this is where, as I was saying before, it's like Silmarien come again, right? It's almost like the Silmarien situation, except more horrible. Instead of
more violent
and passing it, now we have the actual usurpation and frankly rape. I mean, he takes her forcibly as his wife, right? So I mean, there's not only a political usurpation, but even an incestuous rape going on there. So it's just as horrible as it could possibly be, as far as the violence of that and the failure of Númenor to take that potential what might have been. And if you think about Tar-Míriel's weakness, right, again, how she's helpless to prevent anything from happening. Yeah. Well, but that's exactly what Númenor's turning away from. Back to what we were talking about before with weakness and humility, right? After Tar-Palantir, what Tar-Palantir presents them is the opportunity to embrace humility, right? Turn back from the direction that we're going, go back in humility to the elves and to the Valar, to our our former worldview, turn away from our pride and decadence and all these other things, and let's embrace humility again. And Tar-Míriel, she is the humility, right? Just as Silmarien showed humility in acceding to not being queen, right, and not creating a problem and not causing a civil war way back when. So Tar-Míriel is kind of that opportunity for everybody, and Ar-Pharazôn won't take it, right? Instead, he commits this act of violence, both political violence and even sexual violence against her, and so the opportunity to show humility completely refused, right? And and that's where we end up there with.
And her father, just as a last point, her father, Palantir, his name, Tolkien always tells us something with names because they mean something. And this is literally spoiler before naming the name, already what happens. But this is what happens later, when they lose the Palantiri, they lose contact to the Undying Lands. This is basically, and with each other, Gondor and Arnor before communicated via Palantiri, right? But they literally went back to the Dark Ages when they lost the communication. This is literally like a synonym for talking to each other, helping each other. But when they were lost, when he was lost, he was literally the last hope of communication also to the Undying Lands and the elves. And then it was lost. So, I mean, the stone at Avalon still stands till today, probably. But this is really, foretelling what his name means. Yeah, I hope we will see him, like you said, him and the daughter and what happened. Because, the lifespans grew shorter and shorter, so that is not a really long time they have to cover. Yeah, cool. Corey, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this. You are fabulous, as always. As I said, I'll link everything down below. People, please follow. My favorite thing is when Corey does the Lord of the Ring, going through the Lord of the Ring books. But he also, I love the discussion about the 12th volume. You mentioned that you have
the history
few
of those.
Yes, because the first thing I learned about Eärendil is from you, because I always read it and I had my own thoughts, but I really didn't understand a lot of it. And I love all these little side things.
There's a lot not to understand with Eärendil, for sure. But and right now we're discussing The Nature of Middle-earth, the recent book released by Carl Hostetter. So we're going quite slowly through this. We're going to be discussing this book for a while, not like 30 years, but probably I will not be surprised if it's the better part of a year, because there's a lot of math in this book,
I know.
And
invite Carl. He does lots of interviews. Have you seen? He was Matt interviewed him. I know you know Matt as well, right? So we all of us Tolkien YouTubers, we have a little Discord and community. We always talk to each other, and I know that you talk to Matt as well. And Carl does a lot of invite him. He's so cool.
Actually, he's attended my my class, my discussion.
Okay, I'm not catched up. Okay.
No. I didn't have him on. Like, I mean, he's just like, he was just like one of the attendees. He was just like sitting in on the discussion that we did. So I know he's been following that along. I definitely want to have him on to talk. Well, I'll definitely have him on to talk before the end. But yeah, no, it's fascinating stuff. I mean, this is I am finding the nature of Middle-earth extremely mind-blowing. Just really seeing the way in which he's digging into, Tolkien was digging into his world building, just changes so much of how I have understood Tolkien's later years. Basically, I have a so much clearer sense of what Tolkien was doing with himself between like 1958 and 1973, basically. You know, you can see it so much more clearly. And the answer turns out to be doing long division. That's what he was doing. Yeah,
I know, but look, Corey, he got so much feedback. You know that yourself. You change your mind when you learn what other people think and feel about the words you write, right? So this is, this is what he did in the later years. Sadly, all these books were already published, so he couldn't say, oh yeah, let's change the law of everything. Yeah, I'm a bit mardy with Karl Hofstadter, about all the timings and the years of the, all the year things. I made videos about that, and now I have to change the dates, but anyway, it's fine. Good. Corey, I really enjoyed this. So, to sum this up, she-wolves of Númenor, maybe they weren't, bad ruling queens. There's a reason why he pointed them out. I learned a lot.
Well, I mean, I think, my big conclusion here would be that perhaps actually the queens of Númenor are like, they're like the soul of Númenor. He tells the story of Númenor through the queens. I think, you can get the whole story of Númenor from the queens. And that's really fascinating, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. You see the rise and the fall, basically.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Thank you very much, Corey. I love this. Chat soon. Everybody follow Corey. Otherwise, what are you doing with your lives? Thank you very much. Till the next one, my lovelies. Bye-bye.
Very good.